Welcome to The Change, a podcast about the changes in life that shake, break, and make us. I'm Laura, a 45-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum who has until recently always loved change.
And I'm Cathy, a 53-year-old writer, podcaster, and mum, and change is actually my kryptonite. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia on which this podcast is recorded and recognise the continuing connections to lands, waters and communities.
We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past and present. Cathy, hello. Hello.
And who have you got for us today?
Oh,
and I say you because we're all going to know from the topic this was a Laura pick.
This absolutely was a Laura pick. Jayne McCartney is a sexologist, educator, public health professional and journalist. I've also interviewed Jayne a couple of times before and I love her knowledge and experience. She actually began her writing career as an OG mummy blogger in the early 2010s, didn't we all, with her work featuring in high-profile web and print publications, including Reach Out, Archer Magazine, The Punch, Sydney's Child, and guess what? Mamma Mia. Jayne holds a graduate diploma in sexology from Curtin University and a Master of Science in Medicine, Sexual and Reproductive Health in Public Health from the University of Sydney. But she currently works in sexual assault prevention in the tertiary sector. She's a proud mum of 2 adult children. Jayne is curious, like me, about the way people navigate sex, dating and relationships in a post-dating app world and has a particular interest in ethical dating and empowering parents to be foundational sex and relationship educators for their children. We love all the sound of that. Welcome, Jayne.
Hi, Jayne. How are you going?
I'm pretty good, yeah. Don't like winter. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm okay.
Not good.
Not winter.
we don't like winter either.
Yeah, it's a bit cold.
So, Jayne, getting right back to the basics, can you tell us, or me, a little bit, and all of us, a little bit about sexology, what it is, and why you decided to study it?
Oh, great question. Because I think a lot of people have either an idea of what they think sexology is or they have no idea and they try to imagine it's all kinds of things that it's not, which was also me when I first heard about it, and that's kind of part of how I came to it. But sexology basically is the scientific study of human sexuality. And what that encompasses, and I've got a graduate diploma and also, my master's is a Master of Science in Medicine, but with a sexual and reproductive health kind of major. But my graduate diploma is in sexology. And some of the things that you study are anatomy, psychology, culture, forensics. I've studied all of those things. Obviously, because law and sex crimes is, a part of human sexuality. What other things have I studied? Oh, so many different types of things. And it all kind of comes into what creates, everything that builds our sexuality, I guess. As for how I came to it, so my first career, well, I've had 2 kind of careers. I was a journalist and also a high school teacher. And I was, just going along on my merry way, being both of those things. And
what did you teach at high school?
I taught at St Pius at Adamstown primarily, so here in Newcastle, and at a couple of other Catholic schools around.
And what was your subject area?
Yeah, so English.
Oh, okay, so not PDH. I was expecting you to say PDH, which
nope.
covers a lot of this content.
Exactly, and now when I engage with, because I work at the uni, I engage with students, and if they're studying education or whatever, I'm like, okay, you're going to need to know some of this stuff. I was teaching English, I was just a nerdy book child. And although actually when I think back now, grew up in the fabulous days of Cleo and Cosmo in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I swear these magazines lay the groundwork for me to end up becoming a sexologist. The 80s were, while certainly if I look back now and was to read some of those magazines, I'm sure there would be, in today's, vision, a lot of problematic stuff. But at the same time, they were really breaking some of those barriers for female sexuality at the time. And I remember I was probably
for sure
12, 13, 14, and I used to babysit for this single mom. She was at work and I was babysitting her daughter, and when the daughter went to bed, the mum had a stack of Cleos under her bed, and I would get into the bed and open up the old sealed section and have a bit of a look. And, I absolutely remember learning back then from those magazines, it's okay to masturbate. Like, I cannot ever forget that was the message loud and clear. It's at school. So that is not the message I'm getting there. It's okay to masturbate. It's okay to own your pleasure and your sexuality. And, sex was an important part of being a woman from what I could see from these magazines. So as a very impressionable 12, 13-year-old, that really sunk in for me. And I think those magazines did a great job in that regard, at least. Anyway,
in that era.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Jump forward to, I'm teaching, I'm writing for a magazine, and then my marriage ended. And in the kind of, I guess, the, the ashes of all of that, I came out with an intense, for want of a better word, horniness.
I love that word. That's a great word. Yeah.
I can't think of a better way to put it. But also really needed to unpack what had gone wrong in this relationship. And so there were two things going on at once. I really need to get laid. And I'd been a serial monogamist in relationships, since I was 17 years old, had never had time to just be. And so my best friend said to me, don't get a boyfriend, don't get in a relationship. You need time to yourself. So I did both of those things. And there's, there can be this pathway of self-actualization through sexual exploration. And I basically went on that path, not knowing it was a thing, but ended up there. And because I've got the type of brain that I have, I'm having, incredible sexual experiences, really exploring everything, under the sun. But because I have a reflective nature, I was also reflecting and writing and journaling all about that. So it became the field, which I didn't know was a field, but sex in general became this fascination for me. And then I heard a podcaster back in the early heydays of podcasting back in 2016, who I was always just searching up for, things to learn, this kind of thing. And this person, Juliet Allen, who is an Australian sexologist, introduced herself on her podcast as a sexologist. And I'm like, what the heck is that? What is a sexologist? That's not a real thing. And then I'm like, this is, something I'm interested in. Searched it up, and only the two places in Australia, Curtin University and Sydney Uni, studies specifically postgraduate studies in those areas. And I actually ended up studying at both of them. But, yeah, that was kind of my journey to sexology, which was...
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's how many years ago was that the journey began?
Yeah, so the original journey,
to sexology. Yep.
So my marriage ended in 2010.
Okay.
I've been now 14 years in. Like 5 PhDs by now. I've done. But I started studying in 2017, I think, for my diploma. And I thought, oh, God, I'm 40, however old I was, 46, 47. 48. I thought, I'll just do the diploma. It's 2 years part-time. It's in Perth. I'm going to be, turning 50. I don't even know why I'm doing this. And finished it and I'm not finished. I need to keep going. So I ended up at Sydney and, just fell in love with it. So,
And how does it work in practice for you? Sorry, now, do you see people, you're consulting with people, it works through the university here in Newcastle. How is it?
So that's the other thing. When people hear sexology, the main thing they think about when you say you're a sexologist, people think you're a therapist. And I'm a therapist. So sexology is a field of study. It's not a profession. and it's a qualification. So you can study it and then you can get a qualification. Like I've got a grad diploma in sexology and my master's, but it's generally an add-on to an existing profession. And I don't have a psychology undergrad, but I have education. So I'm a sex educator is probably the better way to frame what I am. So I am a sexologist because of what I've studied, but my profession is education and public health. So I'm a profession.
I guess, so that's kind of like psychology is the study or the discipline, but to practice you have to be a clinical psychologist and you have to get that extra clinical practicing certificates and things.
Yes, for people who are psychologists. Exactly. And so in my field, when I was studying my master's, you could do psychosexual therapy. Now, those people have a psychology undergrad and they are, generally working as therapists, but we have a sexual kind of focus. Public health for me. So we work across public health and, sexuality in public health. So at the moment I'm working in gender-based violence, which is, obviously connected to all of this work, but you might work in reproductive health, all of that stuff, or education. So they're generally the areas: psychosexual therapy, education, public health, and also research. So they're generally where sexologists go. But, I've done a certificate in counselling as well because I do see people, I don't see people in like clinic or anything, but generally whenever you start to have this conversation, people will kind of tell you things, and I just want to make sure that I knew how to at least listen to those kind of questions. So
that's so interesting because I've interviewed you a couple of times now and probably asked you all the wrong questions because I'm like, sexologist, right, here's some questions about sex.
Laura is all about the sex. I am not.
No.
But just for any of our listeners, again, this is another Laura guest.
Yeah. I am fascinated because it's such, surely it is an interesting topic for all the reasons, whether you're interested in it personally or not, because, everyone's got everyone's done it mostly by the time they're in adulthood. So I think everyone's got an experience of it. So I think in that way, it's pretty fascinating. But I guess, and you've just, you were just saying before you were talking about going into sexology that you were personally interested in having that horniness sort of moment after your marriage breakdown. And I guess this kind of leads into my next question a little bit, which, you're a woman in midlife now and you are in your 50s and you look fabulous. You're into health and fitness. I know that from following on Instagram. And I guess I just wanted to ask you like a sort of general question about women and sexuality and sex drive after 40 and what you've noticed about it from, your personal experience, but also just from, chatting to people like me who are just fascinated with the subject. So, who's not? But like there's a whole range, right? There are women who have completely lost interest in anything sexy, and then you've got those that want to experiment and get a bit freaky in the bedroom, and they might be in midlife. And I guess what has been some of your learnings around this sort of sex drive, I guess, and especially for women in midlife as a sexologist and as someone who's been on a journey?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right, Laura. For you and Kathy, you're probably you're kind of along that spectrum, right? And that's what it is. That's most of humanity, right? We're all on a spectrum of some sort with all of our various experiences. And so for some women, they find in midlife, whether it's due to physiological changes in their body, psychological or relational changes with their partner, or, just maybe something that they can't even put their finger on, they might lose interest completely. And that is completely normal, common, all of those things. But then you have other women who find that perhaps in their childbearing years, they really felt, oh, God, I don't want another person pouring at me. And so they might have lost their drive then. But the freedom as their children leave home, for example, they find it, they have a resurgence of this, beautiful sexuality that comes through for them or need for that sexual expression. and again, it's just a spectrum and it's unique to everybody.
Mm.
So, you know, I guess from my experience, that was very much grounded in that particular experience. I think I was probably always a sexual person, but I certainly wasn't, you know, known for being, I'm trying to think of the right language to use, but, you know, I wasn't necessarily out there or you know, clearly, you know, sexuality wasn't a big part of my identity like it is now. So that was just that unique experience, and so that I explored it in a way that made me realize this is an important part of my expression, my personal expression, but that's just me. But we are in a society that, because of sex being such a key selling tool for a lot of what we do, sex is very much it has an unusual place in our society that we use it to sell things. We use it to, I guess, rate things, or, you know, how sexy are you? Like that's a of your value in the, I guess, you know, the market basically, which is a really, I know, a bleak way of putting it, but that is the society that we live in, this Western kind of culture that we're in. And so that can make it really hard then when your sexuality isn't a big part of your identity, because what's your value now in this highly sexualized world? And that doesn't allow for the nuance of unique and individual experiences of sexuality. And that is particularly hard then for women as they do get older, because it particularly affects women. Our value is in our sexiness, or our sexual value. And so as you get older, not only do you change in the way you look because aging happens, and that's not the model that we see by and large, but also if you are one of those people that desire is really not a big part of your identity, then where do you locate your value then? And that can be, you know, really, really challenging. But as I said, I have known people who have found the freedom of midlife to actually enhance their sex life as well in really profound ways. So,
and that's nice to know that, you know, it's not all over. I think there's a lot of feeling when you get into midlife that there's a lot of things that are over, you know, and talking of an article that Kathy wrote previously about being invisible and that sense of, as we age, we do become, you know, visually or physically invisible in society. And I think I personally have definitely really only noticed that in the last couple of years, in my mid-40s, that's really starting to, I don't know. And I think because I always felt like I was never the, I don't know, smartest woman in the room, prettiest woman in the room, but I always felt like I could hold my own a little bit physically, you know. And then now I'm like, well, who exactly am I now, that I'm older and sort of becoming this older version of myself that I'm not sure I'm all that comfortable with, and it's still a work in progress. I think it's good to know and have these conversations with women where you're like, well, you know, like you, Jayne, you're a woman in your 50s, you're out there looking great, doing interesting things in this area. And this is part of what, you know, Kathy and I do on the podcast too, is talk to interesting women who make me realize that it's not all over if I don't want it to be, you know, whereas obviously some women are happy with that and comfortable with it, and that's cool too. But yeah.
And I think like anything, I guess, you know, it's not to say that obviously as our bodies do change, it might have an impact. But, you know, for some women, when they're young women, they are so self-conscious.
Yeah, so true.
Another freeing part for older women, you know, if that's the, you know, the way, you know, you reflect and kind of present, that you can give up on all of that. Like, I don't need to suck my stomach in. I don't need to, you know, do this thing. I can just be this glorious. And if you've got a partner that will work with you around that, and a bit intentionality, you know, being intentional about that. And I know there are women that are like, oh, I would not be 21 for love or money now because I'm so much freer in my sexuality. But then it does come back to, at an individual level, how do you prioritize that part of your life, changes how do you, if it is important, how do you prioritize, or what do you do? So,
and I think because we're all Gen X women, so we were all brought up by, boomer mums, and while there was, a sexual revolution and all of those things, and in that generation, I think there might have been a sexual revolution in that they could access birth control and more freely and things like that, but they certainly weren't talking to their daughters about it, and they weren't talking openly. So while we might change our minds about it, having those intimate conversations with our intimate partners about, hey, this is how I'm feeling, or this is how, I'm a bit struggling a bit, or like I don't feel sexy, or I don't, and years ago, I can remember reading something that, like, I don't know, some phenomenal percentage of, like, our brain is our biggest sex tool, like, and especially for women, we can be our own worst enemy. So if we don't feel sexy, if we don't think we look sexy, if we think we're too fat, or if we think we're all sorts of the messages that women tell themselves, we would never say out loud to another person. But when we're saying those things over and over and over in our own heads, that can lead to a whole lot of turn off in our own head. But then to be able to have that open conversation, even with our intimate partners who love us dearly in everything that we are, and they've seen us, they've often seen us actually giving birth, which is not the prettiest thing ever. Like, let's be honest, it's not a pretty sight. And anyone who looks at those post-birth photos of women with full face of makeup and all the rest of it, it's not like that for 99% of the rest of the world. So they've seen us in all of our worst, and yet to be able to sort of have that open conversation and go, hey, this is really, like, it's really, we still, I don't know, at least for me, I still feel like a little bit of a naughty schoolgirl going, oh, sir, have you got a rubber? When you're asking, like, when you used to ask the school teacher for, like, you meant eraser, but, like, of course we were all being stupid because I went to a girls' school, and we all thought it was hilarious to ask the teacher if he had a rubber, knowing that was another word for a condom, like. But we
are the 80s.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And when you think, a couple of the things that are kind of coming through in what you're saying, you think about, like, patriarchy, and then the shame that's associated with sex, which generally is connected oftentimes to some religious traditions. And, not always, but that's definitely part of it. And there's a whole bunch of social and cultural kind of elements. And so that shame piece and the patriarchy that tell us that we need to look a certain way. And then sexuality, as I said at the start, it covers so many aspects of humanity. We're too ashamed to explore it. We're too stuck in the, patriarchal mindset of you're only fuckable if you look a certain way. That is a lot. It's a lot. And, where do we take time to unpack that? And, I'm fortunate for me that my life sent me in that direction, that have actually spent time unpacking it in detail. But when does, just every, regular person who's not a sexologist, when do you to do that? And the intention that you can, kind of unpack some of that, or with, some support, professional support or whatever, it's possible, but it just depends. Like, life is busy. Is that a priority for you and your partners,
It's so true.
I know over the years, my kids are grown up now, but I can remember, when they were babies, and, like, for me, the second I heard a squeak from the kids' room, like, it was like, I'm done. Sorry, whoops, what? Sorry, ips, no, yep, get away from me. Baby's crying, like, don't come near me, don't touch me. And it's just really interesting that for women, we need so many of the conditions to be right. And I've also heard that women need to feel loved to want to have sex, whereas men don't really care. Like, I mean, that's obviously a very wild generalization, but it's not that, and that wasn't actually the statement. It's that women need to feel loved in a relationship. They will take love over respect, and men will take respect over love. And when those conditions are right, then sex can happen, and intimacy, and obviously sex is one part of a relationship, but it's actually part of a bigger conversation around intimacy because, you know, holding hands, kissing, like all of those things, you know. And this book describes sex as like the icing on, or actually it described it as the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cupcake, you know, like sex is the kind of the last thing, but all the other conditions need to build together to get to the cherry on the top sort of thing.
Like you can't put a cherry, if you just put a cherry and there's no cupcake or icing, it's what is it?
Yeah.
But I would like to actually challenge that because the gendered kind of explanations of sexuality, I personally and probably scientifically believe are really unhelpful. And perpetuate this kind of you know, everyone seems to go to their corners and, you know, a lot of if you ever watch that terrible show, Everybody Loves Raymond, is that what it was called?
Oh, yes. I remember it, yes.
That's exactly what it was called.
About how his wife wouldn't sleep with him. These are really terrible gendered stereotypes that don't help anybody's sexuality, whether you're, you know, specifically heterosexual, but you're also discounting a whole bunch of non-hetero experiences. So, you know, if you have two women and this, you know, particular finding that women want love and respect, that doesn't take into account in, you know, a same-sex relationship. It could just be two different people. And the book that I you know, wholeheartedly recommend is the book called Come As You Are by Dr. Emily Metkoski, I think is her name.
We'll pop a link in the show notes.
Please do, because it is incredible, and she has beautiful examples where the female in a hetero relationship is the more the person who wants more sex than the partner, and the partner really, and these are real people that have come to see this doctor, and you know, then she'll use a same-sex example or, you know, a polyamorous example. Like all of these, you know, I think we need to broaden out understandings and the way we talk about sex, because as you were saying, Kathy, you know, we have all these messages that have come into our brain, and then that affects how we then express, right? And it's so hard to unpack all of that. And so every time a child, and I don't know what gender your children are, but every time a child hears a woman or a man or anyone perpetuating any of those gendered kind of stereotypes, then they think, oh, yeah, this is how sex is. And in fact, if I can go down a quite a more serious path, the gendered stereotype that men always want more sex than women is actually, within the evidence, seen as one of the drivers of gendered violence.
Wow.
Because men think, I need this, the whole blue balls kind of scenario. And then I need sex. Women are the gatekeepers and stopping us all having sex. And then men will be pushing, and women will be like, I'm not even in touch with my own pleasure or my own sexual desire because I've been told I shouldn't want it. And it's so problematic. And I think we need to really undo all of those narratives in our society as a starting point. And that's, you know, and that's where older women, I think, because, yes, you know, it's unfortunate for us. We grew up in the 80s and internalized all of that. And it's a bit shit because, you know, then we're still living that out in our, you know, older lives. But we do, I think, have a responsibility to kind of learn not to pass down those things to our younger people.
Well, to be totally frank, we were slut shamed. Like, if we had, you know, like if you had a boyfriend, if you had more than one sexual partner, you know I certainly at at my high school, I went to all girls high school till year 10, and then I went to a co-ed high school in year 11 and 12.
We go to the same school.
I grew up in the Sutherland Shire, so who knows? Yeah, and I went, and all of a sudden it was like boys, and it was just like I can remember just feeling like it was like a whole new world, like, and it really was a whole new world. But yeah, it was like wow, but you didn't want to look at them too much. You didn't want to kind of appear too interested. You didn't want to, because if you even dated more than one boy when you were at high school, then you were automatically targeted as a slut. And then, so all of that, as you say, we internalized all of that. So if you were interested in sex when you might have been in your teens or your 20s, growing up at the time that I grew up anyway, in where I grew up in, southern Sydney on a beach side, I used to go to the beach where Puberty Blues was filmed. It was like that. So I grew up in that environment, but very much, you internalized all of those feelings. Like if you felt sexual, if you felt like you looked good, if you wanted to have sex, or if you would never have initiated it because like you automatically became a target. And then I think that just, well, for me, it certainly has played throughout. Like it's a record that plays and plays and plays. And, and you get to a point in your life where you're like, could I undo that? How do you turn the record back around? Turn it so it's turning around a different way. I don't know. Yeah,
one step at a time, I think, and we're never too old to learn and change. In my opinion, the brain is plastic, or however that piece of science works.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean. And I think if we think we can't change, then it probably will come true. But I think, little by little, and these beautiful conversations, and, God love it, social media, I think I've seen the change. And social media has many things that are wrong with it, but that, the changes around the conversation, and I was lucky coming through my own sexual exploration, just as, I guess, Twitter, then Instagram, then Snapchat, then TikTok, then Tinder, into all of that. Like I was advent of Tinder, and that was such a game changer, disruption. And, the conversation on social media, I have seen the culture, not enough, but we're shifting these conversations. And, I think we can all, no matter what point of life we're at, can certainly listen to some of those, the new research and the new evidence and what we learn, and just open our mind to it a little bit. It's hard to undo the messaging that's all inside, and that sometimes take work with a, sexologist, a counsellor.
You work with, like, in the sex education space and the sex public health space.
Yeah.
So you work with a lot of empowering parents to be open and more clear communicators when it comes to sex. So what should parents, any parents who might listen to our podcast of young adults, what should they take away? Like, how can we have those, open communication?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I think it's something I want to do more of. I do a little bit of it, but it's certainly an area that I want to get more into, because I think, as we've brought, consent and respectful relationship education now into our curriculum, parents are their first teachers, right, of children. And I think, first of all, parents, you need to get comfortable with the awkwardness. That's number one. That's the one thing that I always tell. It's never going to be super. Some people are naturally more open, and that depends on their upbringing, whatever. But if you're a regular person, you feel a bit awkward, how am I going to have that conversation? Get comfortable with that feeling, and then go looking for resources. Look for really great, reputable resources there's I've never found an Australian version that's quite the same, but there's a great American website called Scarlet Teen, and it has just the most beautiful resources. So go seek out resources that are already there. And
Yumi Stein's book, we've got that for our boys. Yeah. Welcome to Sex. And,
welcome to Sex and Welcome to Consent. Yes, thank you, because they are amazing.
They're excellent.
I wonder if it will change, like, I don't know if you've seen in the last kind of 2 weeks, but there have been the new syllabus have dropped from New South Wales, in New South Wales at least. And so in the PDH, so that's, what is it? What is PDH? Physical development, health, PE,
education,
basically PE for anyone that's listening, you know, that is sport.
Old school,
sporty. But from kindergarten right through to year 10, there's a topic, and it's a mandatory topic in all of those syllabus. So these we're talking about, you know, because some children in New South Wales start school at 4.5, all the way through to, you know, 16, 17 in year 10. And it's all the way through, including our life skills. The life skills curriculum is a new curriculum as well. And it's called Respectful Relationships. And it's a whole topic around consent and all of those behaviours. So I wonder if these new curriculum that will start to be rolled out, mandatory from 2027, I think, will help families.
Surely has to help.
Yeah, and I think there's a big piece of work to be done between schools and parents, bringing them to go on that journey together. I've looked at some of the curriculum materials, and they're amazing. But I think parents, some of the danger is parents will be like, that's okay, the school's doing it, I don't need to do it. By the time your kid's 4, you should already have had these conversations ongoing from the minute they're born. I would love to see prenatal sex ed for parents, actually, to start getting them used to that before because when the kid arrives, then you're flat out. You don't have time to be learning this. But really pregnant parents are ripe for, tell me the best way to be the best parent possible. And I would love to see that done and scaffold out what that learning looks like year on year on year on year, day on day on day on day. It needs to be just consistently through our conversations. And it's not just about sexual intercourse.
No,
relation.
Sexuality, relationship, community, all of those things. So I just, I guess I just encourage parents, to get super curious and look for those resources, reach out for the help. Don't put your head in the sand. That's the number one thing, I think, because if you think someone else has got it, that someone else is potentially going to be born.
Which is kind of terrifying, right? Like that is not where we want our children to be getting their first sex ed.
Oh, God. No. I've got 2 boys, so almost 14 and only 7. So there's a bit of a gap there. But it's so funny. Even at dinner tonight, they were asking questions because we watched Parenthood with them, which is actually held quite well as a film from the late 80s with Steve Martin. And it's very funny. Thing? Yeah, the vibrator bit. And there's a bit where the teenage boy is masturbating and he doesn't want to talk to his mum about it. So he talks to his sister's boyfriend, Todd, played by Keanu Reeves. Anyway, this generated a whole discussion in our house about masturbation. And it was just funny. We were just sitting around the table and just the 7-year-old was like, so he's touching his penis, just had all these funny questions. We were like, yep, mate, that's just normal. It's what, what happens. It's just, I love it.
I feel like doing it right now, but when you do, in your bedroom.
No.
Like not in the lounge room with everybody else.
That's right. It was just kind of.
Not embarrassing, but just not in the lounge room.
Sweet, innocent kind of question from a 7-year-old. But my husband's a GP and he's very happy to be, open out with everything, and it's nothing's ever off the table. And I find it all quite amusing, actually.
And that's the thing. And with your husband being a GP, like that's amazing. He's going to more than likely be a person who's naturally that way inclined. And some people are like, oh yeah, but that's not me. But the fact is, the more you have the conversation, the less weird it becomes.
That's right. Yeah.
So sounds like a normal dinner conversation for your family.
Yeah. And then we just moved on to something else. It wasn't like a big deal. It was just like, well, sometimes when you get, it's whatever. And then we started talking about school. You know, it was just funny. I don't know.
Sometimes when you know maybe you do have to have a little bit of a tricky or awkward conversation, finding a movie like, you know, I mean, I don't think you specifically sought out Parenthood to watch for that specific reason.
It's family movie
finding
night.
a movie or a TV show or, you know, a theatre production or something, you know, I mean, like theatre production is very random, I know, but I recently took my daughters to see Anne Juliet.
I was thinking of that one because that's great.
A huge range of themes and it's just an amazing production.
I loved it.
Sadly, it is not in Australia anymore, but like those TV shows, all those sorts of things can open those conversations because then you can have those dinner conversations, you know, around what happened in that movie. Did you know, like, and some, or maybe they don't, and they don't want to talk about it around the dinner table. So I don't know about you, Jane. I'm not sure how old your children are. I'm assuming they're sort of similar ages to mine. But those side-by-side conversations,
like
we used to have those in the car when they're trapped in the car trapped in the car and no one's looking at each other because your eyes are on the road, their eyes are anywhere but on you or the road. But, sometimes that's when you have to have those tricky conversations.
Most parents know, and my great recollection is it was in the car where my son asked me what a clitoris was. God, just out of the blue one day.
Oh, that's
just
funny.
like, I can't even remember what I said, but I just thought, it's a part of the girl's body and it's the part that feels nice.
My husband worked for Qantas when our son was little and he wanted to look up what a black box was, and we were like, no, we won't be Googling black boxes, like no, because the first thing that comes up is not aircraft flight recorder.
I had a friend whose daughter had an assignment, I don't know, anyway, it was something to do with squirting something, and a shock in their lives.
Oh gosh, you've got to be careful with the old internet. There's everything everything's there. Are there any changes, big or small, that you would still like to make in your very interesting life?
Good question. I still think I dream of going to write a book in a foreign land.
Oh, so lovely.
I know, that's probably a change. It's funny. Sometimes I think, I'm going to do all of the things I have thought I'm going to do. And then recently I was like, oh, God, I'm 55. I may not do all of those things. But it's like a cognitive dissonance. I'm like, I always thought I had so much time.
Oh,
and I'm like,
we do.
Well, we do, but I don't have all the time in the world. So,
get on that book. Get on it now.
On average ages, like you've got at least another 30 years in front of you.
I imagine I'm going to have like 5 other careers.
Yeah. Maybe you will.
Average career is about 6 years. Yeah, you could.
You
could easily.
Love that.
And finally, to our last question, our podcast is called The Change, which is in part a reference to the midlife experience of all women, perimenopause, menopause. So what we want to know is what your experience or feelings towards the change are.
Well, I think personally I've been quite fortunate. I've had a fairly trouble-free, for want of a better word, experience. I went through menopause during COVID, which was kind of good because I was kind of hibernating and just like in my little hole, and which helped. So it felt a bit like I didn't have to be in the world when I was going through that. And the changes that I did feel, I found them confronting. Just like, this is happening to me. I can't believe this is happening to me. I thought I'd escape this. But I'm really, I think, trying to bring, again, coming back to that idea of messaging, wrapping messaging around it, that this is just another part of life. And it's certainly, we need to support women going through it, just like we should be supporting young women going through, puberty and getting their period for the first time and celebrating those moments as milestones. I think we do really poorly of celebrating menopause as a milestone and then honouring, the wisdom that can come with age. I think this is an ageist society. So that's kind of, I would love to see that change and love seeing the work that people like yourselves and I think Naomi Watts does some beautiful work.
Yeah, she's great
as well. Seeing that happen so that it can become something that we honour a little bit better than we currently do, which is probably why I felt that I was happy to go through it during COVID when I could be hiding away from the world.
And emerged out the other side like a butterfly from a chrysalis.
Well, it's debatable, but I have my moments.
I actually saw one of the menopause doctors that, or she's, I guess, a menopause advocate. She's a doctor, but she's an advocate in the US, discuss the other day saying that menopause describes like a single day in our lives, really. It's that 12 months post the last period. But actually we need another word to describe all of the changes, like we have a word for hypothyroidism, we have words for all sorts of other conditions, and some women absolutely sail through menopause. They have no flushes, but what they're starting to understand around the changes that come from that reduced estrogen, reduced hormones, not just estrogen, I should say, like progesterone and testosterone, because we need all three. They're sort of wanting to change that term because it actually changes women. Yeah. Like for some women it's great and it's wonderful. But for other women, not so much.
Big
it's like a fundamental change,
and really can be quite distressing, I think. And, I think we need to support it without not pathologizing it, but I think we do pathologize it in some way, right? It's a ick, whereas you can acknowledge the challenges, the genuine and real challenges of it without thinking that person is now, oh God, just a problem, I think that's to change the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I am going to eat some humble pie, I think.
Okay.
Because that was a very interesting chat. And I certainly learnt something almost immediately. I thought a sexologist was a sex therapist. I'm going to say it straight up. I was hesitant with your choice of guest, not because I thought that Jayne would be hard to chat to or anything like that, just because I thought, oh my goodness, we're having a chat with a sex therapist. Like,
you're worried.
Very weird kind of sex therapy session with a friend, not my partner. That I was just kind of in my head. I was like,
you were concerned.
Yeah, I just didn't know where it was going to go.
Sure.
But actually, turns out sexology is not sex therapy. Two very different fields.
Yes.
And sexology is the study of human sexuality and everything that
encompasses.
covers.
Yeah.
And whilst Jayne, as she said, she has done a degree or some study in therapy so that she understood how to navigate those conversations with people when she was having those conversations. She isn't a therapist. That isn't her focus. Like she wanted to understand sex.
Yeah, I thought it was, obviously I saw the word sexologist too, and I was like, great. And even though I've spoken to Jay before, I'm like, just talk to me about sex, because I find it just an infinitely fascinating topic from every angle, whether it is, from a kind of human study perspective or just between partners in a therapy way. And Jayne, she's just got a lot of no nonsense, straight to the point sort of thoughts on it. And I liked how when we were talking about, sex for women in midlife, which is a lot of the, us that will be listening, and how there's no right or wrong way to do it. There are women having a resurgence of their sex life, or there are women that just no longer want to have sex, and that's okay. Like, it's all okay. But I just find it really reassuring to talk to someone like Jayne, who's kind of studying it from a theoretical perspective, and also just seeing lots of different examples of that. And obviously a lot of what Jayne does is quite serious along the way. When you were talking before, a lot of what she does is working with people who have been through trauma, and, there's a very, very serious side to what she does. Yeah, but it was a really interesting, very eye-opening chat, I thought.
Absolutely. And I know she pulled me up, and I remember her sort of like, thinking back over that conversation where she pulled me up, and I was sort of saying, I think it was around, that women are less inclined to maybe want sex and men want it more or something. And she really pulled me and challenged me on that.
She did, yeah.
Kind of thought process around that actually, it can be a challenging time for men as well. And these are really quite outdated thought patterns, and they're not helpful. They're not helpful for women. They're not helpful for men. They're not helpful within relationships, and in general, they're not helpful in society. So I'm thankful that she challenged me on that, because.
And we're two, midlife women, heterosexual relationship, we're married, so obviously we're coming at this topic from quite a normative perspective, and there's lots of people out there doing life quite differently and having different sexual experiences at every age. So I think it's okay to, but I think, like you say, it's good to be challenged, isn't it? And go, well, actually, does this serve me? Does it serve us generally? And maybe not.
Yeah,
good
and
question.
does it serve like our future generations?
That's right.
Yeah. Like, do we need to have different conversations? And when we're having those conversations, and consent is a big conversation that we all need to be having with our children, with our partners, with our, it doesn't matter at what age. In actual fact, we need to start having those conversations around consent with our children much, much younger. Yeah, all of those things that we spoke with Jayne about were amazing. And the key kind of, for me, the other key takeaway was really around that open communication, whether it's within a relationship, so within a relationship with an intimate partner, or whether it's as parents of children, really getting comfortable with the uncomfortableness of having awkward conversations, because the more you have an awkward conversation, the less awkward it becomes. And then that is really normalizing the conversation around consent, or the conversation around, hey, I'm not really into this, or hey, speaking up. And so, really, it doesn't matter at what age, and it doesn't matter whether it's within an intimate partnership relationship, or whether it's, between parents and children, or whatever. That those open lines of communication are absolutely key for everything.
100%. And the kids, talking to your kids openly, that's something that we're kind of going through currently at the moment with teenage son, and one slightly younger. And the Welcome to Sex book is excellent, Yumi Stein's, for starting those conversations. And we're navigating that currently, and I think it's really interesting. And I always find it interesting talking to friends who have kids of similar age when they say they don't or haven't yet talked to their kids. Maybe because I'm so used to being an oversharer, I will happily talk about this kind of stuff with my kids, even if it's embarrassing. I just think it is important, and I just want my kids to be good partners in the future and understand all of those things, consent and what it all means. And it is just, such an important conversation to have with your kids.
And I guess it probably is a little embarrassing, because those of us who are Gen Xers and, older millennials, we kind of grew up and it was like very much confined to sex ed class at school.
Yeah. Or the Where Did I Come From book. Where do I come from?
Where did I come from? And you didn't really talk about it very much with your parents.
Not in detail, no.
I know for me, like I grew up with Dolly Doctor, so that's where I had a lot of my information from.
Magazines.
So, really having those open conversations and making it not shameful, right?
That's right. That's the other factor,
It's not shameful to be in a loving relationship with an intimate partner. That is not shameful. There is nothing to be embarrassed about.
That's right.
That.
Yeah.
And the more that we are embarrassed about that and the more that we try to hide from those things, the more shameful, and then it gets hidden away in dark corners, and then
that's right. Kids feel they can't talk to you about it even when it's good, and you want them to be able to tell you, enough. They don't have to tell you everything, but I think you're right. It's not just about consent and the law. It's about pleasure and fun and why you might and falling in love and all the other things. It's just about having like that open dialogue and helping kids to understand that it's not shameful.
Thank you, Laura, for the wonderful suggestion of Jayne, and for bringing me out of my comfort zone.
Anytime.
Thanks for listening to The Change, a fully independent podcast. Whether you're seeking inspiration, curious about change, or just here for the great banter, we'd love you to make The Change your new go-to podcast.
And even better, send us your voice notes or questions about change. We'll use them on the show. Email us at changepod2023@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at _change_pod. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for more on The Change.